So hello, everyone, and welcome to Skype a Scientist Live. My name is Noah Giberson, and if you were expecting Sarah McAnulty, who's the director of Skype a Scientist, and you're disappointed, just know that I wake up every day not being Sarah McAnulty, and I'm also disappointed. But nonetheless, I hope you'll accept the substitution of me today. I'm really, really excited that you're all here with us to learn about space plants from our very special guest, soil and crop scientist, Morgan Irons. Welcome, Morgan.
Thank you for having me.
We're so excited that you can join us. I'm really looking forward to learning a little bit about what you do and your path to becoming a soil and crop scientist, especially one focused on space and very cool stuff like that. Just a reminder to everyone before we start, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A section below that you can see. It's not the chat, it's actually a specific button down at the bottom of your screen, Q&A. And with that, Morgan, would you like to tell us a little bit about your research and how you became a soil and crop scientist?
Yes, definitely. Okay, so hi everyone, my name is Morgan Irons, and I'm someone who works at this very interesting intersection between earth and space agriculture and environmental science. And the cool thing about this also is I'm still a student. I'm a graduate student at Cornell University, and I'm still very much in my early career as a researcher. So I'm 27 years old, still in my 20s, and I've been able to do a lot of cool things with the research that I've been able to do and kind of the opportunities that I've created for myself based off of the things and people and information that I found myself surrounded by. And so just to go really fundamental about like my science background, I'm an environmental scientist. So I pretty much I've been trained to look at environmental ecosystems on a systems level. This could be forests, this could be deserts, oceans, whatever an environmental scientist is interested in, they can look at this at a systems level. And I'm very much interested in agroecological systems. So agricultural systems that also apply ecological theories and principles for how we can better manage our agricultural systems. And then I'm also an astroecologist. So I was trained as an ecologist first. So as an ecologist, I pretty much was trained to look at the different living and non-living elements of an ecosystem. So that's the plants, the fungi, the bacteria, worms, the fauna, as well as like the mineralogy of the soil, the climate, all of that, even humans and how we all interact within the ecological system. And then I wanted to take this further because I was interested in the space connection and looking at this from a space perspective, which is where the astroecologist element comes in. And so as an astroecologist, I pretty much do the same thing of looking at all of the different elements and organisms of an ecosystem, but I look at them in space. And I've been able to start doing this not only theoretically and thinking about it for future missions, but also sending my own science missions into space. And so when I was training to be an environmental scientist and an ecologist at Duke University, I decided to put a space twist on my research and perform this large-scale Mars agriculture experiment in research greenhouses. And this is a picture from that experiment where I was actually using a Mars regolith simulant, which is a geological substrate or the beginning stages of what could potentially become a soil. And I used that in this experiment to see how we could grow different species of plants, microorganisms in a soil environment that's very similar to what we would find on Mars. And so I was able to do a lot of work in the greenhouses with that, which was really cool. And you can see it's a pretty large experiment. And I was able to work in the lab to do a lot of analysis with this, with working with the plants, working with the soil. And out of this research, pretty much what I was very much interested in was this question of how do ecosystems form over time? how do we go from this bare rock system to an actual community of a biodiversity of plant species and organisms, the forests and other ecosystems we see outside? What did they look like hundreds, if not millennia ago? A lot of them might have looked like the bare rock or some of these other different phases of how an ecosystem formed over time. And that's pretty much what we would be starting with on Mars, is very much a bare rock, desolate kind of environment. And so I was interested in how ecosystems form over time and applied that knowledge to my research. But I was also interested in how do biogeochemical cycles start at the beginning of soil formation? And so biogeochemical cycles are the biological, geological, chemical cycles that happen in the environment. That can be the oxygen cycle, the nitrogen cycle, the carbon cycle, the water cycle, the rock cycle, all of that. And a lot of these biogeochemical cycles all meet in the soil. So soils are just these highly complex systems where it's very multidisciplinary. There's physics, there's chemistry, biology, just a bunch of different fields that can work in this area. And so with this, as I was performing this research and thinking about these questions, I actually went ahead and developed a new model for a habitation system that could work on Earth or in space. And I call this a quasi-closed agroecological system. So you can see I was an undergraduate college student during this time, and you can do research that leads to the development of patents, that leads to the development of really cool experiments. You don't have to wait for someone to give you permission to take this space and do these cool things. Sometimes you just have to cold call people, cold email people, and be like, hey, I have this really cool idea. Here's my initial ideas. Would you be willing to mentor me or help me find the resources I need to make this happen? And that's how I made this happen, because nobody at Duke was performing space research. And so I had to ask a bunch of environmental scientists, would you like to put a space twist on the way you think about your Earth system and just think about how it could potentially function in a space environment? So I got a patent out of this. I did my research and got my thesis out of this. And I also founded a company that was based on this research I had been doing for about a year and a half at that point. So I started this research in the winter of 2014, went through that year, and then in May of 2016, so about 6 years now from today, I was at a space industry conference, and nobody was really talking about space agriculture at that time. Nobody was really filling this niche. And so I decided to, based off the research that I was doing, based off of this need in the space industry, but also this cool intersection I was finding between similar challenges between Earth and space agricultural systems, I decided to found Deep Space Ecology, which works at this intersection of Earth and space to look at food insecurity challenges and the problems of human sustainability in the deep spaces of Earth, the Moon, Mars, and beyond. And so I founded this company at the end of my 3rd year as an undergraduate student at Duke University. And so again, it's like I was an undergraduate student, still very, very early in my professional academic career, but I was finding these things that I could do where I can make an impact, and founding a company, even though I'd never take business classes before. I've never really had experience with running a business or anything, but I saw a need there and a cool opportunity there, and I decided to make it happen, and find the mentors that I needed to help advise me, since I was very much on a learning curve for how to run a company. And so out of all that research I did in an undergrad, I really figured out that soil science was very important. How we very much depend on our soil here on Earth to support our ecological systems, to support our food system. 95% of our food comes through soil processes. So we're very much dependent on the soil. And this is probably most likely, definitely will be the same when we go out into space. We're just very much dependent on our soil. And so I decided to take this into a graduate program. So I'm currently a PhD candidate at Cornell University in the field of soil and crop sciences. And at Cornell, I have this interesting thing that I do where I look at bacteria and microorganisms in the soil, and I'm interested in how the organic adhesives that they produce, so they produce sticky stuff that allows them to stick to the minerals and organic matter found in soil, how that affects the soil structure. So you might reach your hand in and get like a clump of soil out. How is that clump held together? Well, microorganisms are part of how that clump of soil, that aggregate, is held together. And I'm interested in not only how that happens here on Earth, but the gravity mechanism behind it. Do microorganisms depend on gravity, the force of gravity, to produce these organic adhesives that allow us to have this soil structure here on Earth? And so to study this question and see if they really are dependent on Earth's gravity, I wanted to send natural Earth soils and biochar growth media to the International Space Station. And it was an effort, you know. My first proposal to the ISS National Lab was rejected, but we took their comments, we rewrote it, we figured out how to better put forward our argument of why this is an important experiment to perform, and our second proposal to them was accepted. And so sometimes you have to persevere and rework things and really take what would be considered a failure as an opportunity to begin again with more knowledge than you had before. So failures don't have to be this negative, devastating event. They can just be another opportunity to learn and to come back even stronger and more energized than you were at the beginning. So I had this opportunity to send 3 different soils into space to the International Space Station. One of them was from here in Ithaca, New York. Another one was from a collaborator over in Berlin, Germany. And then another one of our collaborators whose business, Bio365, they have a biochar growth media that they produce. And because they were helping fund this, we also sent their growth media into space as well. And here's a picture of all of those. And they have different soil textures. One of them is very sandy. One of them is more of a silty, loamy. And then the other one's very fibrous. So very much different in their texture. And they have their microbiomes, or all the microorganisms living in there, are intact because you just dig them out from the ground outside. And so this was the first time that Earth soil, natural intact Earth soil, has ever been sent to the International Space Station. So this is very, very exploratory, cutting edge. It's like, we have this hypothesis, but it could really be the complete opposite. We just don't know until we get our data back and have our Earth control to compare it to. And so we sent the soil to the International Space Station. And here's a picture of astronaut Dr. Kate Rubens, who is a microbiologist, with one of our soil health in space sample packages. So we had 4 of these packages with tubes that had all of our different soils in it with different treatments in them. And you can see like the sample floating there with her hair going all over the place. So it was cool to receive these pictures and see the samples actually up in space. And here are some pictures from when I was prepping the samples at Wallops Flight Facility off the coast of Virginia. You can see all of the stickers that people leave behind from their missions, and I was able to leave my sticker behind for my space mission. And that was the rocket that lifted our soil samples into space. It was really cool. And then here is a picture of just the soil after we got it back from space. So we kept it, we had the incubation experiment happen in space, and then they froze the samples, and we kept the samples frozen when they got returned back to Earth and then transported from Florida to Texas all the way back up to Ithaca, New York, where I'm based. So we wanted to keep them as frozen as possible to keep them in the stasis of where they were in microgravity. And you can kind of see some of these cool water formations and soil formations. So it was cool to really see that when I opened them up and kept them on dry ice when I was handling them, to see these formations still intact. And this kind of experiment is not done alone. I'm not a one-person team. I have a bunch of people and organizations that supported me throughout this experiment and collaborated with me. And we're currently in the process of finalizing all our results from this experiment. And then just to finish up real quick, we also sent soil up with Blue Origin with a New Shepard parabolic flight. And with this one, we were pretty much more interested in the effects of rocket launch and return on our samples, because the samples are just in microgravity for about 5 minutes. So we can't really do anything with that, but we can really see if we can isolate the rocket effects on our soil samples and how we can better handle future soil science experiments, whether we're sending soil to space or even, I'm like, if there's any JPL NASA people on the line, they're currently in talks about how can we best bring back Martian soil, Martian regolith from Mars to Earth. So I'm hoping with the experiments that I'm performing that could also help inform how we handle that soil when it is brought back to space, when it is brought from Mars to Earth. And then yes, we are publishing papers as we go along so that people can have access to all this information, because science communication and open access to this information is very important to me. I want to be able to just allow anyone to be able to access this information so they can have this knowledge, and if they want to pursue research, science, whatever it may be in this area, art projects, like I want them to be able to have this information. And then I also have these cool opportunities since I've been working in this space for about 7.5 years now. I'm currently a judge with the Deep Space Food Challenge. That's being run by NASA Centennial Challenges, as well as the Canadian Space Agency. And I was a phase 1 judge last year, and now I'm a phase 2 judge this year. And so it's cool to be able to be in this point where, like, I'm still a student, but I'm developing my expertise in this area. And people are recognizing that by inviting me to help out with these things. And so it just shows, like, if you really put your heart and mind to something and find something that you're good at, that you enjoy, and you really work hard for it, and you don't wait for people to give you permission to enter that space that you deserve to be in, then you can have these opportunities to be part of something that's really cool, that brings you joy and sometimes tears and stress and anxiety, but ultimately something that you would be very happy doing for the rest of your life, no matter what it may be. So thank you all for listening to my introduction, and I look forward to answering some questions.
That was incredible. I am blown away. I was not expecting the twist where you sent stuff to space. That was like, wow, there's a lot more. That's incredible. Judging by the questions we're getting, everyone else here agrees. There are 3 sort of main categories these questions are coming in on, and I'll try to ask them, sort of all together to the best of my ability. But there's still more coming in as well, so we may need to backtrack and add some. And they basically come in the categories about just sort of like how does space research on plants work? The second category. These are basically questions about Morgan, which the working title is The Morgan You Know. Then finally, we have questions that are sort of just generally about space and life in space and how your research plays into that. So one question, I first wanted to say, there was a quote you said where I think you were at Duke and you said, would you be interested in a space twist? And I think that is an excellent question that I can't imagine anyone saying no to. So great job recruiting collaborators. The first question in the sort of general space plants technical category is, how do you plant a seed in space?
Oh, very, very good question. So a lot of the horticultural plant science research that we see in space, a lot of it is currently done on the International Space Station, but China also has their own space station. And before the International Space Station, rockets were used to start off some plant science in space. And the US Air Force was also partly involved with that as well. But currently, with research that's being done, a lot of the plant growth experiments that are done currently are hydroponic based, which means that instead of a soil growth media, they use water systems and just push water with nutrient solutions in it through this little pond system where they're holding the seed to allow the seed and then the roots and the eventual growth of the plant to happen, and so that the plant can get those nutrients. And pretty much, if I'm remembering correctly from just reading the research and talking and working with like the food science team down at NASA Kennedy Space Center and researchers that I know who work in this space, one way that seeds are held is either you have like a little holder that you put them in, or you have a wick system where the wick, like the seed is between these two wicks, and the wicks help to retain water, but also hold the seed in place. And then the seed can grow out of that wick system. So that's how a lot of that research is currently done. In the past, seed pillows have been used as well. And seed pillows were like an engineered growth media that was then put into like a pillow. And then in the middle of the pillow is a slit with, again, like some kind of wicking or holding system for the seed. And then you can wet down the seed pillows and then the plant grows out of that. But one system that's very much used a lot is the veggie system up on the International Space Station for different plant studies. And then there's also fundamental studies with like Arabidopsis, which is a very, very well studied plant. We know a lot about Arabidopsis. And some of those studies are done more on like plates where you're not going to eat this, but you want to better understand some of the fundamental mechanisms of how like roots grow or how the biomolecular workings of the plant happens. And so you would grow it on a plate of some kind that holds it in place. So those are a few different things about how plants are currently grown on the International Space Station.
That's awesome. And you actually mentioned or sort of teed up some of these other questions here where I'm just going to sort of bundle a few of these because I think they might be part of a similar answer. People are interested about how whether plants in space have to grow without water. If they have water, where does it come from? And then in the, does the water, it's like in a low gravity situation, does the water float away or do you water from the bottom up?
Good questions. So yeah, the water goes through piping systems where there's a lot of force behind them. And a lot of physics research had to be done with this because the way that water moves through the pipe, you know, like you might have seen like astronauts do those really fun educational experiments where they wring a towel and the water just kind of clumps to them instead of just falling like it would on Earth. And so that's very similar to what would happen in a piping system. And so I don't know as many details about the engineering behind that, but with the International Space Station, they've pretty much designed their systems so that they're able to have these their own water management cycling system to help with the astronauts and their needs, but also with the plant experiments and the hydroponic systems that they have going. And one really cool thing about my research that I'm going to be looking at is with the soil systems, they have all their little pores that happen. And some of the results that we're seeing were like, is this an effect of how the water is being held within those pores differently in this microgravity environment? And so we've kept some soil frozen, and we're going to take it under like an electron cryo scanning transmission electron microscope to see if we can see where the water is being held and do some physics calculations to see if that can help us inform on some of the results that we're seeing with like the microorganisms and the carbon cycling and all that. So it's very interesting, and it's a very important question that needs to bring together physicists, engineers, if you're getting that biology element to it, but the biologists, environmental scientists, depending on what you're looking at. So yeah, there's things like that happen.
More on the technical specs. These people are definitely trying to grow plants in space like today. People are interested in how gravity, I guess the influence of gravity affects root growth. So like in microgravity, I guess, versus like on a planet that may have more or less gravity. Or yeah.
Yeah. So, and this might be like, I can probably use this to answer like, why do people perform plant experiments in space as well? What's the point? I mean, like, okay, maybe like if we get boots on the ground on Moon or Mars, understanding how to grow plants in a reduced gravity environment will become very important. But how does growing plants in space also benefit us here on Earth as well? And the roots, that's a very interesting thing, because pretty much here on Earth, we have these assumptions of, oh, the roots grow down because gravity is pulling them down. And that's what's driving the way the roots grow is gravity, because that's a huge force vector that's working on these systems. So that must be what's happening. But is that really the case? Is gravity really causing the roots to function in that way, to form in that way? Or is something else happening, and gravity being this huge force vector is just masking what's happening, because we can't easily differentiate what could potentially be happening on that biomolecular level with this huge force happening. Like somebody could be pinching you, but if someone's slapping you at the same time, you won't necessarily know that you're being pinched, because there's another huge force happening that could overshadow what's actually causing you more pinpointed pain. So taking plants and other living systems and any experiment outside of Earth's gravity, well, directs gravity, into low Earth orbit to the International Space Station, where you're pretty much in this constant free fall. And microgravity happens because the International Space Station readjusts itself. So you have little forces that happen where that's where microgravity comes in instead of zero gravity. So when you take these systems, these plants outside of Earth's gravity, you're now getting rid of that huge force vector. And you can see if the system does not function the same, it starts to do weird things that you didn't expect that you would see on Earth, then it seems like gravity might be part of the mechanism of how the plant is functioning. But if the plant just continues to do what it's doing, it doesn't change, nothing changes in the molecular side of things or the development side of things, then gravity might not actually be driving that particular mechanism. Something else is driving that mechanism. And that's why space research is very important for fundamental research questions, to really understand how systems have evolved here on Earth, but also how we and these systems are also independent from things we assumed, like assuming that gravity is driving everything that we're seeing, which is very interesting. It's so interesting. And so with root systems, there's this paper, I believe it came out, and maybe I can do a quick Google search right here. It's a paper by Dr. Annalisa Paul and Dr. Robert Furl. And here it is. It's from 2016, and I can even put it down in the chat. And I don't know if some people may not have access to this because sometimes journals have you pay or you have to be a student to gain access. Let me make sure I can send this to everyone. Okay, there we go. I just sent it to everyone. So this paper by Dr. Frohl and Dr. Paul that came out in 2016, it looks at the effect of spaceflight on the gravity sensing oxen gradient of roots. And so just quoting what it says right here, quote, "Our primary aim was to determine whether gravity has a direct role in establishing the oxen-mediated gravity sensing system in primary roots." So, end quote. And so pretty much this experiment was asking that question of like, we've always assumed that roots sense gravity and that's what's driving them to grow a certain way, but they wanted to see if that's really the case, specifically with these oxen gradients that are in roots. And what they found was that it seems like gravity isn't the main thing driving these oxen gradients for the roots, if I'm remembering correctly. And that something else is potentially happening here, and it might be another system in the root that's being affected by gravity. So I'll have to reread this, but this is an example of a fundamental roots paper that whoever asked the question about roots would probably find very fascinating, that shows one of the reasons why it's important to do fundamental plant research in space to help us better understand how plants are functioning here on Earth, which can help us better understand how we can manage agricultural systems, plant systems here on Earth, how we can make sure that plants are flourishing and getting what they need to survive, especially if it's in a managed system like an agricultural system. So that was a little bit of a long question, but I hope that was interesting to a lot of people, because that's where space research can really benefit people on Earth for the plant side of things. We also benefit from Earth observation data from satellites to help us understand climate and what's happening with our ecological systems. Satellites help us with telecommunications, being able to communicate with each other. The hurricane detection system that we have here on the East Coast of the United States, where we get a warning for, oh, these hurricanes are going to be coming and you need to be prepared for that. That came out of NASA, and they developed that system to help them do their rocket launches. And then they're like, oh, wait, we could actually use this to help the general public. So it's actually very interesting how people in the general public benefit from space research and don't realize it. There needs to be better communication about how this all feeds into each other and how we ultimately benefit from space research. And it's not all trying to get off Earth to another planet. It's also making sure we understand our Earth and how we can take care of it here.
Absolutely. And I mean, you're doing a great job with that communication.
Thank you.
So I just for time, I'm going to move on from, we have a few more. I'll try to circle back around to some of the technical questions if we have time. But I wanted to get to the questions about you as a, okay, this is a plant pun I just thought of in the morning, a budding scientist. Sorry, cannot resist those, sorry. And the first question is, when did you learn that you loved plants? Or do you hate plants? You might really despise them. And
No, I love plants. I've always loved plants. I've very much always been someone who's loved the outdoors. Whenever my family would go camping or hiking, I loved it. But I also, growing up, this is not the case anymore. But just to get a little bit more personal, I grew up in a religious culture that had some very fundamental gender roles. So while my brothers were out camping and doing the really cool things where I'm like, oh, I really want to do that. I was learning how to cook and bake and sew and keep house and all of that, which I'm glad I know how to do, because now I know how to do everything. I can do the housekeeping stuff and I know how to do all this bushcrafting outdoor stuff. But I kind of grew up in that kind of environment. And so where I was able to build a lot of my connection with nature was through understanding it through academics and science and everything. And then when I was able to really be able to like set up camping trips and go out and hike and like do all this cool stuff outdoors, I was able to apply the science that I had been learning to those experiences. And so I like to feed in a bunch to both of those. What I do in my free time in the outdoors applies, I bring that science into that, but also vice versa. So yes, I've always loved plants. I've always been a very outdoorsy person. And I garden. I have been involved like in forestry camps when I was in middle school. I forage. I do local foraging for mushrooms, ramps, fiddleheads, juneberry. Like there's so much for local foraging as well. So yes, ultimately I love plants.
Very cool. Another question here. We've heard a lot about stuff that you've coordinated sending to space and then retrieving it and doing cool experiments with it. But have you ever been to space? Are you getting ready to go / do you want to?
It's a good question. No, I have not been to space. That requires going through like NASA, or I know there's some citizen organizations and other opportunities, competitions out there that could lead to those opportunities. It would be cool to be able to go to space at some point. Is it an ultimate goal of mine where it's like, if that doesn't happen, I'll be really sad? No. Like, I think it would be really cool. Maybe if we've had some successful missions to the moon and Mars, and then I have an opportunity to go, maybe. I don't know if I want to be the first person to go there. But ultimately, my goal with what I do is no matter where people may find themselves here on Earth or in space, I want to be able to help them live their lives to the fullest with stable agricultural systems, being able to continue their food cultures and what's important to them and their connection with their ecological and agricultural systems. I want to be able to use the privilege that I've had in having this education and having these experiences to be able to help people and meet their needs and help them with what they need. And yeah, it's, if I go to space in the process, that would be cool, but it's not an ultimate goal. And
Sure.
It would be cool to be able to use this research to be able to help with the efforts that are being made to send people to the moon and Mars.
Well, just a quick question that is an addendum to that. So just basically a number we're looking for here. But this is a great question. How long could you live on the International Space Station before you would want to leave?
Oh, well, so I'm trying to remember the longest someone's been on there. I think it's
Someone
been
just
about,
broke it, I think, recently.
yeah, it's like a year, a little bit more than a year. Yeah, I have I followed that entire process, and for some reason I'm now blanking on his name. The twin study,
Right. It
all of
was
that.
either Mark or Scott Kelly, but I think it was just broken as well.
Yeah,
Like the last few days, yeah.
Yep. I don't know, because I've never been in a situation where I've been in a very, very foreign controlled environment, because it's like they're in a very engineered system. They don't have access to like a forest or the beautiful waterfalls that I have here in Ithaca. I think there would definitely be some like novelty to it, where it's like, oh, this is so cool, I'm in space, I'm floating and everything. And maybe it would be cool to be there for a long time, but ultimately I'm an environmental scientist. I love nature. Like we were saying, I love plants. I love being able to go out and do hikes and be able to explore my local environment. So I would not want to spend the rest of my life on the International Space Station. Maybe being able to have some time up there, no matter what it may be, would be really, really cool. And if we get people to the moon or Mars, and there's this need to develop potential like ecological systems, which is where a lot of my research has been based in agricultural and ecological system development and formation over time. Where if you're on Mars, if you want to go and take a walk through like an agricultural field, that would have such an emotional, mental, physical effect on a person. And there's a lot of studies done on like the effect of even the color green on our psychology and our emotions. So yeah, I think it would be cool to go to the International Space Station. I would not spend the rest of my life there.
Understandable. So we're going to move on to, there's some questions about just sort of general space questions relating to plants. And a really good one, given what you were just saying about how the color green and just sort of being around plants and just sort of the I guess like the aesthetics of nature can influence our quality of life. There's a question here: if you grow a plant on a different planet, will it still be green or will it be a different color?
Yeah, so the green color of plants comes from the chlorophyll, and when light hits it, it reflects the wavelength of green, which is why we see that color. And then like with flowers, if you have a purple flower, it's reflecting the light of purple and absorbing all the other wavelengths of light. The color would change if you have a nutrient deficiency, which is what we see here on Earth as well. If you see a plant that just starts to yellow or starts to look burned and crinkled, that's usually an indicator of a nutrient deficiency in the soil or whatever media it's growing in. So that's where like soil management can become very important, or understanding why that nutrient is deficient in that system. But it's also important because the ecology, the plants that we would be bringing into space are from Earth and used to this environment. Maybe over time they could evolve, but they have their growth requirements currently, where it's like they needed this amount of sunlight at this intensity of sunlight, they need these temperatures, they need this kind of soil environment with a pH of this number, with a cation exchange capacity of this, with this kind of soil texture, sandy versus more clay versus more organic, etc., etc., etc. So we have to make sure that, like, when we bring plants into space, that we can explore this potential evolution of plants over time in an environment, but we also have to control a lot of that environment. You just can't throw a seed out onto the surface of the moon and expect it to grow. It will not grow. That environment is too extreme. It doesn't have the oxygen. It's a vacuum. You can't do that on the moon. You need to have a structure that provides environmental controls for sunlight, for temperature, atmospheric pressure, things like that, that would allow that plant to grow in that environment. And then you can do experiments with, oh, if we do this and propagate the plant over multiple generations, do we start to see an evolutionary change? Like, there are things like that that you can do.
Cool. And speaking of doing experiments on stuff that's been to space and growing plants, that was a great transition. What was the state of the soil when you got it back? Was the soil still usable for plants?
So we are analyzing the soil right now. The thing about space experiments is you are very restricted on space when you're on the International Space Station. So so we couldn't send up a lot of soil. So we're very restricted on the amount of soil that we can use. So we're very particular about what we're using it for, how we're analyzing it. So we can't grow plants in it. We just don't have enough to do that. But we are doing soil analyses of it, chemical analyses, biological analyses of it, to see what the state of it is after it's experienced microgravity. And then we have the earth control experiments that show just what the trend would be if it was here on Earth, just doing its thing in Earth gravity. And then you compare the two, whether qualitative or quantitative comparisons. So we pretty much, with those samples, before I could open them, I needed to pull the atmosphere out of them to know how much carbon in the form of CO2 was in that atmosphere. And we know what the initial state was because we have the ambient atmosphere that got sealed into those tubes before they went up into space. So you pull out the atmosphere and then put it into a gas chromatographer mass spec machine to get that CO2 carbon measurement, so that you can get some of the atmospheric carbon dynamics. And then you do a DNA test to understand what the microorganisms are doing, like how have the bacteria changed, how have the fungi changed. And a hypothesis that we had was the fungi are not going to do as well as the bacteria, because fungi rely on being able to spread throughout the system like a spider web. That's a good visual of that with their mycelium networks, while bacteria just boop, pop down onto a surface, and then they can create their own biofilms as more cells aggregate onto that location. So looking at the microorganisms, how they affected the carbon dynamics. So that's part of looking at the atmospherics, if they're decomposing things and they're producing CO2. We also had like wood carbon in there as well, a toothpick pretty much, and seeing how that decomposed over time. We also had samples that were compacted versus free floating to see if that had an effect on all these different things. With the soil structure, we're doing what we call aggregate size fractionation analysis, which is those aggregates or clumps that you see in soil that can be really small micro aggregates or bigger macro aggregates. We're seeing how stable those are. And the hypothesis surrounding that is if your microorganisms aren't doing as well and they're not contributing as much glue adhesion to those aggregates, then your aggregates may not be as stable as they would be here on Earth. And so we do this analysis to test the stability of the aggregate structures. And then we also look at the carbon and nitrogen within those aggregates as well to see how much was occluded, how much organic matter was occluded or hidden away within those aggregates that the microorganisms couldn't get to because the mineralogy is hiding them. So yeah, those are a few things that we are looking at with the International Space Station.
Super
experiment.
cool.
Yeah.
Very, very cool. I think there's a couple questions that Sarah always likes to ask at the end. So that we have time to get to those, I'm going to ask one more question, which again is aggregated from a lot of the questions. People were very interested in whether or not you can grow, maybe now or even in the future, specific fruits in space or on other planets. So I think what let's do here is we'll have a lightning round. Can you grow it? And I just want a yes or no. There's 4 of them, and then you can do all the qualifications at the end all together. How about that? We could also not do this. That's fine as well.
I'm like, ooh, I don't know if I can remember everything that's been grown in space.
All right, well, you can pass as well, and then we'll round it all up at the end.
Okay.
So can you grow it? Watermelon.
No.
Strawberries. Potentially. Apples.
Pass.
Pass. Okay. Potatoes.
In the current system, no, but potential.
Okay. Now we're at the end of our lightning round. You're free to expand on if you want.
Yeah, so I'm sorry if I got any of that information wrong. Maybe there has been experiments that have been successful or have tried to grow these things and I'm not remembering, or I haven't read about it yet because there's just so much information out there and there's only so much reading that I can do in a day. But my thought process with this is with fruit, they hold a lot of water. So you need a lot of water to be able to produce these plants. And currently with the International Space Station, you're restricted on space and you're restricted on how much water you actually have. So a lot of the plants that have been grown are dwarf varieties of plants because they can't just like grow a huge like stalk of whatever plant in that environment because they don't have the space, and so they tend to focus on growing smaller things. I think they grew a variety of peppers recently, and we're doing some research surrounding those peppers. So there's that. But yeah, you have water restrictions, you have space restrictions. Apples, you would need a tree. So no, I would say no. Actually, that I was just thinking of the fruit and I'm like, okay, how like the structure of the fruit, but then it's like I completely forgot that you would need a tree. So sometimes I get hyper focused on like, okay, strawberry, but wait, the strawberry needs like a bush. So like there's also those like restrictions with the space in the water as well. It's like, okay, they're like with the pepper plant, it's not as bushy, and so you're able to grow those in a relatively tight space like you have on the International Space Station, and that's what they were able to do. So yeah, I would say like ultimately it's about space and water content. Those would be major restrictions on what you can grow.
Gotcha. Well, so the question Sarah likes to end with, we're coming up against the end of our time here. Question 1 is that you have everyone's attention in the world and you can tell them one thing about space plants. What is it? And then question 2 is you still have everyone's attention in the world and you can tell them one thing about literally anything. It can be as big and important or as silly and as small as you'd like. What would that be? So number 1, you can say anything about space plants. Number 2, just something you want to share with everyone.
That's rough.
We've been talking for an hour, but if you could just give us a single thing.
I would I would, okay. Dang it. This is actually really hard, y'all. Okay, one thing I would say about space plants is that by growing plants out on the International Space Station, even on another planet, it has the potential to give us greater appreciation for what we have here on Earth, because it's so hard. It's so hard to grow plants on anywhere off world. And it's going to be super expensive. There's going to be finances involved with this, supply chains. It's very complex. And we have Earth and all its amazing environments. And so we need to protect. I think one of the things that growing plants in space tells us is that we need to work to make sure we preserve, conserve, and restore our ecological systems here on
Earth. Incredible. And question two, which is even broader. Is there just anything about anything that you have a captive audience would you like to share?
Oh, we need to make sure that we are creating space for everyone to be at the table and be inclusive and be understanding and be able to work collaboratively in these spaces. We should not be excluding anyone. We should not be having prejudices or stereotypes exclude people, because people's experiences and knowledge, no matter where it comes from and who they are, is very important. Some of the most amazing conversations I've had were with farmers who never went to college. They've just grown up working their family farm, and that's what they continue doing. And like, we've put so much emphasis on what college did you go to? Are you a social media sensation? Like, we put so much on being seen by labels and the way we look, the way we talk, where we come from, that creates a lot of division. And it's these differences of experiences and where we come from in our stories that allows for beautiful innovation and creativity and these amazing ideas to come forward. And so ultimately, we need to make sure that no matter what we're doing, we need to make space for people, create safe spaces for people to be able to be included, to have access to the space that they deserve to be in. And if we have the power and the privilege to make that happen, we need to make sure that we're using that to help people and to listen to what people need, and hope give them the power. Like, something that I've heard recently, I went to Madame Bowie's Nobel Peace Prize talk yesterday here at Cornell. And something she said that her uncle had told her is that empowerment is the ability to give part of your power to another person. And so that's what we need to make sure that we're doing, whether here on Earth or in space. We need to make sure that we're working together and empowering people and centering people, making sure that we're doing what we can to make sure that people are heard, that they feel safe, that they're included, that we're able to do this together and appreciate the diversity and the humanity within each other.
Really. Thank you, Morgan, very much for being here. We really appreciated the opportunity to get to learn about your project and your life as a scientist and how you got there and how you're going to continue to do incredible things. So we'll all be eagerly awaiting all your publications based on this tiny bit of soil. Before we go, I just wanted to mention to everyone that Skype a Scientist is a nonprofit organization that aims to bring science to as many humans as humanly possible. If you'd like to support our program, you can do so at patreon.com/SkypeAScientist or at paypal.me/SkypeAScientist. And with that, have a great day, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Morgan.
Yes, thank you so much.